Hannah Twitchell is a senior at Iowa City West High School. She was diagnosed with depression after a family member's attempted suicide. She's channeled her experience with mental health into leading an awareness group at West High with Ryan called Behind the Mask, and she'll be reading an essay titled Peanut Butter Patterns.
What I'm about to say is very different from what I thought I would be saying when I joined This Is My Brave. I thought I would read bits and pieces of a story I wrote in 2012. That story, entitled 18 Hours, is one that I consider to be the best thing I've ever written, even now, 3 years later. I wrote it because I didn't want to forget anything that I was thinking or feeling in the 18 hours between my mother's attempted suicide and my first visit to her in the hospital afterward. I was planning to walk on stage tonight and read the most poignant parts, adding commentary on how the last 3 years have shaped my views on my mother, my life, and mental health in general. April 2nd, 2012 is an important date, one that I consider the start of my mental health story. My story is something that I share often with my peers and teachers in the hopes that by sharing an important part of me, I can help someone else realize that the outside doesn't always match the inside. And more importantly, that that's okay. Mental illness doesn't make you inferior. Taking medication it isn't some sign of weakness. All that hopeful and reassuring stuff. That's what I plan to say today. But sometimes it only takes a moment for all of the wisdom and perspective that you think you have to disappear. March 12th, 2015 held that moment for me. The day I sat in my family's car, crying those wretched, screaming kind of sobs, and considering the existence of a world in which my mother didn't exist. The day I stayed on the phone with my mom until the police came to pick her up. The day I sat next to her in her hospital bed as she went through overdose, shaking and crying and convinced that she was still going to die after her attempt on her life. I don't know how much of our hospital visit my mom remembers, but I know it's something that I will never forget. People very seldom know as much about their parents as I do. I've seen more sides of my mother than many people see of themselves by age 18. I often forget that I am 18, but I don't know what age fits me better if it isn't 18. It's almost like I've thought too much about it. You know, that moment when you look in the mirror and recognize your face, but just barely? It's called dissociation, and I learned about it in my AP psychology class during our abnormal psychology unit. Major depressive episode, obsessive compulsive disorder, schizophrenia. It was actually kind of comforting going down the symptoms list of each page in our little mini DSM-5 and thinking, well, at least I'm not hearing voices and counting my jelly beans before I eat them. I was mostly quiet during that unit, but it's not that I would cry or shut down whenever someone discussed suicidal tendencies as a symptom of a major depressive episode. I just didn't want to think about it. As I told Brook when I was explaining why I wouldn't be at our first rehearsal, 2 weeks just isn't enough. I spent those 2 weeks running away. 2 weeks turned into 3, and then 4, but I still didn't want to think about it. I wasn't so much running as plugging my ears and singing to myself whenever I felt like it, something annoying like Justin Bieber. I just didn't have the energy for anything else. It took me a while to notice that I was thinking about it, just not in a way that I was used to, because I was angry. I was angry at my mother for not just trying to kill herself, but for all of the decisions she made that led her to a place where she felt that death was the best option. I was angry at her for pretending everything was normal just a week after. I was even angry at her for trying to reconnect with my sister and me shortly there. I was angry at everything. And once the floodgates opened, there really wasn't any button to close them. So I would say, yes, Mom, I'm on my period, whenever she called me out on my bitchiness. Or I would say, no, Mom, I'm fine, whenever she tried to ask me about my day. I couldn't bring myself to look at her when she sat in my spare chair and tried to initiate some kind of talk. I just couldn't do it. And I couldn't think about why I couldn't either, because that was worse. I was angry, and I wouldn't let myself figure out how to fix it. I don't blame my mother for her suicidal ideation in dark times. I know it's a part of a disease that she's battled for years. But if you're afraid of the dark, you don't walk into a cave. There are precautions that need to be taken because you know what happens once you're in that dark. If you can't swim, you don't take a dive in the English Channel. If you're allergic to peanuts, you don't go and eat a Reese's peanut butter cup. And you can't talk about accepting the consequences and then walk to a field in Tiffin and down a bottle of aspirin while I'm at a doctor's appointment, Mom. I'm angry and I'm letting myself feel this anger. I'm no longer going to push it on my classmates and siblings because I'm making myself think about it. I'm not going to go any longer without finding the focus of my anger because I am important too. I'm not the center of my mom's suicide, not a reason for it, far from that. But just because it's not my struggle doesn't mean it's not my struggle. What I have to say is important because I am affected by what you do, Mom. When I become the kid at school whose mom is dead, when I don't have a mom anymore, when I'm a parent short at my senior graduation, that's when I am affected. And that's why I'm angry, because through a long and convoluted series of events, all those possibilities were too close to reality, because you made choices that led you down a darker path. And Mom, you know you. Just like I know that I get worse without regular sleep, you know exactly what puts you in a dangerous headspace. And it's a pattern. When you look at April 2012 and March 2015, they are near carbon copies of each other, right down to a stressful move on the horizon, now a North Liberty resident instead of Coralville, and me being preoccupied with a theater production, Cinderella 2K15. If you've eaten a Reese's peanut butter cup before and nearly died, you usually know not to do it again. You usually stop yourself at the candy aisle, or at the cash register, or right before the first bite. And you didn't, Mom. You took it right up to the EpiPen stage. But sometimes it's just not that easy. It's not all black and white. It never is. And sometimes you need help breaking that pattern. My pattern goes from my grandmother to my mother to me. Almost 50 years of shit that's just now going to come to light. I often forget that I'm 18. I don't know if I feel young or old. Of course, in the grand scheme of things, I am very, very young. I'm young and aware, and I'm done running and plugging my ears. Maybe those are just the things that we need. Because, Mom, we haven't talked about this yet, but I think we should. We should talk about why I couldn't say this to you until it was in front of over 100 people. We should talk about how I want to talk to you, and not the mom that you wish you were. Because that mom, that perfect raven, she doesn't exist, just like the perfect daughter, the perfect Hannah, she doesn't exist either. We should talk about how we can stop this from becoming you and your own mother. And we should talk about how we can break this pattern together.